What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
She called me unstable, and people believed her. Not because I screamed. Not because I made a scene or cried in front of anyone. No, they believed her because I didn't say anything. I didn't protest, didn't yell, didn't try to prove myself right. I just shut up, watched her play her part, and took note. That's the trick, isn't it? If someone accuses you of being emotionally unstable, the second you react, it validates the accusation. You're either too calm and detached, so you're clearly suppressing something, or you're upset, which just proves their point. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And that's exactly the box my sister cornered me into. Lindsay always had a way of flipping reality on its head and making people not only believe it, but repeat it for her. It's like she was born with this sly gift for making herself the sympathetic one in every story, even when she was the one lighting the fire. Growing up, she was always Mom's favorite. Not because she was better, but because she was easier. I was the kid who asked questions, who stayed up reading books about psychology when I was 10 because something didn't sit right in the house. Lindsay? She smiled on cue, stayed quiet during adult conversations, and always played the part. She figured out early that keeping your hands clean is more about timing than morality. The thing is, I never thought she'd turn on me like this. Not publicly. Not professionally. It started small. Subtle. Like all good sabotage. A few months ago, a client canceled a meeting with me last minute. No explanation. Then a coworker who used to be friendly suddenly seemed distant. We had a meeting one afternoon, and when I offered an idea, she just gave me that thin-lipped smile people wear when they're humoring someone they pity. At first, I chalked it up to the usual workplace weirdness. You work with people long enough, things shift. People get moody. Whatever. But then came the text. A friend from college, someone I'd stayed close with over the years, sent me a message late one night. It was one of those awkward, hesitant texts you send when you feel like you're betraying someone, but know they need to hear the truth. Hey, it said. Did something happen between you and Lindsay? She's been saying some things. About you. That you're not doing well. That you've been having episodes. I didn't want to believe it, but she sounded serious. My heart didn't drop so much as it folded. I stared at the message for a long time. The room was quiet. I remember the lamp next to me buzzing with that cheap hum from an old bulb. It was the kind of moment that doesn't hurt immediately, it just makes you feel cold. I asked her what exactly Lindsay had said. She hesitated, then shared part of a voice message Lindsay had sent her. My own sister, telling people she was worried about me, that I was off lately, and she didn't know how to help me because I refused to get treatment. She made it sound like I was some bitter recluse spiraling in silence, refusing support and lashing out at everyone around me. I sat there for a long time, letting that sink in. It wasn't just a jab. It was a setup. That kind of thing spreads. It sticks to your name like gum on a shoe, impossible to fully scrape off. She knew exactly what she was doing. That story she crafted? It's the kind of tale that slides into people's minds and builds a home there. The worst part is, she knew I wouldn't respond publicly. She banked on it. Here's the irony, I'm not unstable. But I have been angry. Furious, even. I've spent the last 15 years cleaning up after people who burn bridges and then blame the wind. After my divorce, I put my head down, built a business, and supported my family, her included, every chance I got. I added Lindsay to my company phone plan when she said she couldn't afford her own. I gave her my old car when hers broke down, paid the insurance, handled the registration. I helped with daycare for her son, brought groceries to her house more times than I can count, and covered her rent twice when she was between jobs. And the thanks I get? She spreads rumors that I've lost my damn mind. I tried to justify it at first. Maybe she was jealous. Maybe she felt left behind. Maybe this was some twisted cry for help. But those thoughts only lasted a few hours. Because the next day, I walked into work, and the receptionist, who has never had a bad word for anyone, barely looked at me. Something had shifted. The air was different. And that's when I knew the whisper campaign wasn't just gossip. It was working. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and scrolled through our family group chat. Lindsay had posted a funny meme, One of those tacky stock photo women with messy hair, surrounded by fire, captioned, "When you're strong, independent, and emotionally unstable." My mom responded with a laughing emoji and said, "Sounds like someone we know." I didn't reply. I just stared. Not at the screen, but through it. Like I could see the line between what I'd given and what I'd gotten back, and how badly it had tilted out of balance. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my phone or scream. I just sat there. Quiet. Because I realized something in that moment. The most dangerous person in a family isn't the loud one. It's the one you push too far and mistake for weak. The one who says nothing until they do something. And that night I decided, if Lindsay wanted to paint me as unstable, I'd give her a story she could dine on for years. But I'd do it my way. Clean. Legal. Precise. I just had to wait for the right moment. And believe me, it came. Looking back, I probably should have seen it coming long before it started to bleed into my professional life, before the tone of emails shifted from direct and trusting to hesitant and overly formal, before my own assistant began to speak to me as if I were made of glass or wearing some invisible sign on my back that said, "Approach with caution." There were signs, small and scattered, like pieces of broken glass on a kitchen floor, tiny, almost invisible, but sharp enough to slice you open if you weren't careful. And I wasn't careful. I was too busy playing the role I had always played in our family, the reliable one, the one who pays, fixes, shows up, covers the bill, carries the load, and never asks for anything in return except maybe a little loyalty. That was my mistake, assuming loyalty was the price of love, when for some people, it's just another thing to exploit. I suppose the first real warning came one Saturday afternoon when I stopped by my mother's house to drop off some medicine she had asked for, a prescription she could have picked up herself, but instead decided I'd be better suited to retrieve. She met me at the door with that polite smile she reserves for dinner guests and casual acquaintances, and I immediately felt the cold edge of distance in her voice, like I was some telemarketer interrupting her weekend. She didn't invite me in, just stood on the porch, arms crossed loosely over her chest, and said something that, at the time, didn't register the way it should have. "I heard you had a rough week," she said, her tone casual but pointed, her eyes flickering over my face the way people look at you when they're trying to detect a hidden illness. "Lindsay said you've been a little off lately. Maybe overworked. Or overwhelmed." The words hung in the air, soft and heavy, like fog on a windshield, blurring everything just enough to be dangerous. I didn't react. I didn't give her what she wanted. I simply handed her the bag with her prescription, nodded once, and got back in my car. But my mind was already spinning, pulling thread from thread, trying to unravel the message buried beneath that one innocent-sounding sentence. She'd heard from Lindsay. That I was off. That I was overwhelmed. Not in a concerned tone, not like someone offering support, but as a suggestion, a whisper, an introduction to a story she was being fed one slow, poisonous spoonful at a time. The next night, I called Lindsay. I didn't plan a speech, didn't script anything in my head, didn't rehearse a calm voice in the mirror like I might have done years ago when I still believed in resolving things the civilized way. I just called, and she picked up with her usual, overly cheery, "Hey, stranger," which landed like a slap to the face. I skipped the pleasantries. "I'm going to ask you something," I said, my voice flat, steady, controlled the way you hold a glass that's too full, aware that any sudden movement could cause everything to spill. "And I want you to answer me honestly. Are you telling people that I'm unstable?" There was a pause, short but loud, filled with the sound of her gears turning, her fingers probably tightening around her phone. Then came the laugh, light, dismissive, the kind that people use when they want to pretend that something serious is just a joke. "Oh my God, Danny, what?" "No. Where's this coming from?" she said, dragging out the syllables like I was the one being ridiculous, like the very idea that she would say something like that was so absurd it didn't even deserve a real denial. "Is this about what I told Mom? I was just worried about you. You've been kind of intense lately." I should have hung up right then, not because I was angry, although I was, but because I realized, in that moment, that no matter what I said or how I said it, she had already set the stage. I was the problem now. And the more I tried to defend myself, the deeper I'd sink into the narrative she had spun so effortlessly. "You don't get to play both sides," I said quietly. "You don't get to tell people I'm losing it and then act surprised when I confront you. That's not concern. That's sabotage." She sighed, the way people do when they're tired of your drama, and then she hit me with the line that confirmed everything. "You're acting exactly like I said you would." It landed like a punch to the chest, not because of what she said, but because she had planned for this. She knew I would call. She knew I would push back. And she had already built the trap to catch me when I did. After I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw my phone across the room, tempting as it was. Instead, I did what I've always done. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started to document everything. Every payment I had made on her behalf, every email or text that hinted at her manipulation, every instance that showed a pattern. Because while she was playing the long game of emotional erosion, I decided I'd start building the foundation for something else entirely. 2 nights later, a mutual cousin sent me a screenshot of a group text. Lindsay, her, and 2 of our distant relatives, people I hadn't seen in years, but who still kept tabs on family drama like it was a sport, had been laughing over a meme. A tacky image of a wild-eyed woman with messy hair and the caption, "Strong, independent, and emotionally unstable, pick 2." Underneath, someone had commented, "Sounds like Danny in one picture." Lindsay had reacted with a laughing emoji and a comment, "OMG stop, she'll sue us for defamation." That's when something inside me broke, not in the way she wanted, not like shattered glass, but like a lock snapping open. A sense of clarity poured in, cold and surgical. I realized that trying to defend myself was pointless. The damage was done. The only question now was how I was going to respond. And I already had the answer. She wanted me to look unstable. She had no idea how calm revenge could be. It's a funny thing, the way people mistake silence for surrender, as if choosing not to argue somehow makes you guilty, as if refusing to defend yourself is a confession, when in reality, silence is often just a pause, measured, deliberate, and filled with 1,000 unsaid things that could burn down the whole damn house if spoken out loud. And that's where I found myself, sitting in the stillness of my own kitchen at 2 in the morning, the glow from the fridge barely illuminating the stack of unopened mail and the empty wine glass on the counter, not because I was sad, but because I was deciding. I wasn't crying, wasn't spiraling, wasn't pacing the floor like some caricature of a woman falling apart. I was planning, because when you've been quietly collecting receipts while someone's been publicly chipping away at your name, eventually you reach a point where the ledger needs to be balanced, and I had spent far too long pretending there was virtue and restraint. The truth is, I had power. More than Lindsay ever realized. And that wasn't arrogance talking, it was just simple, unvarnished fact. I was the one who had co-signed her lease when no one else would touch her credit. I was the one who added her to my corporate cell phone plan because she couldn't get approved for her own. I was the one who handed her the keys to my old Toyota Highlander after my promotion came with a company car, and instead of trading in the Highlander, I let her keep it. I paid the insurance. I kept it registered in my name. Not because I wanted to control her, but because I was raised to take care of family, even when it bled you dry. I had power, not because I chased it, but because she handed it to me piece by piece, every time she chose convenience over responsibility, every time she said, "Can you just handle it for me?" And I said yes, out of habit, out of guilt, out of love. So, when the time came to reclaim it, I didn't need a dramatic scene or a fiery confrontation. I just needed to make a few phone calls. The first was to our company's wireless provider. I spoke to a polite young man named Travis who sounded a little too chipper for the hour, but who didn't hesitate when I gave him the account number, the passcode, and the line I wanted removed. It was easy. Too easy. I almost laughed. Just like that, gone. Her number deactivated, her lifeline cut. And in that moment, I felt the most dangerous thing a woman can feel when she's been dragged through the mud by people she once fed with her own hands, relief. The second call was to my insurance company. I explained the situation calmly, clearly, without a hint of anger, and asked what my options were regarding a vehicle I owned that was no longer in my possession, being driven by someone who was not on my policy. The representative, an older woman with a voice like sandpaper and honey, didn't waste time with small talk. "Well, ma'am," she said, "if the car is registered to you, insured by you, and you no longer have access to it, technically, you could report it as misappropriated property. Or, if you believe it's being used without your consent, stolen." Stolen. The word hung in the air like smoke. I repeated it slowly as if testing its weight. "I can report it stolen." "Yes, ma'am. You have the right." And just like that, the third call went to the local precinct. I told them the truth, no dramatics, no embellishment. I explained that I had loaned my car to a family member, but that we no longer had an agreement in place, and she refused to return it. I told them I was concerned about liability, about risk, about the legal exposure if something were to happen while she was driving a vehicle that still belonged to me. The officer on the other end didn't blink. He asked a few questions, confirmed the VIN, and took the report. It was clinical, procedural. And when I hung up, I felt nothing. Not rage. Not guilt. Just clarity. It was the kind of clarity that doesn't come from revenge, but from release. I wasn't trying to ruin her life. I was simply refusing to let her keep using mine as a doormat. The next morning, I woke up to 9 missed calls and 4 voicemails, all from Lindsay. I didn't listen to them right away. I made coffee first. I sat on the porch, let the sun warm my legs, and watched the mailman drop off a bundle of envelopes that I'd probably toss into the same neglected pile as the rest. Then, once the caffeine kicked in and the stillness of the morning had wrapped itself around me like armor, I pressed play. The first message was confusion. A shrill, agitated voice demanding to know why her phone had stopped working, accusing the carrier of some mistake, and then blaming me as an afterthought. The second message was louder, angrier. She had apparently been pulled over on her way to drop her son off at school. The officer had scanned the plate, flagged it as reported stolen, and escorted her out of the car in front of parents, children, teachers. They towed the Highlander. She was left standing on the curb, holding her purse and a plastic grocery bag filled with snack packs and juice boxes. The third message was shorter. It was just her breathing, hard and fast, like she'd been crying or running or both. And then came the fourth. The one I listened to twice, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remember how she sounded when the curtain dropped and the performance ended. "You bitch," she hissed. "You absolute bitch. Do you know what you've done? Do you even care? You've ruined everything." "Over what? Because I said you were a little off? Because I tried to help? This is what you call justice? God, Danny, you really are crazy." I laughed, but not because it was funny. I laughed because it was so perfectly predictable. The gaslight flickering to the very end. She hadn't expected consequences. She'd built her whole life around avoiding them. And the fact that I'd finally held up a mirror, clean and unflinching, was more than she could process. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from our mother. Just one line. "You've gone too far." And maybe I had. Maybe removing her from the plan and reporting the car were overkill. Maybe there was a gentler way to draw a line in the sand. But you know what? I don't get mad. I get quiet. And when I'm quiet long enough, I start doing things no one expects. Because I don't need to scream to make someone hear me. All I have to do is stop helping. And that, it turns out, is louder than anything I've ever said. There's a certain kind of silence that follows revenge, not the thrilling, movie scene kind with music swelling and cameras panning across a smirking face, but a colder, more clinical quiet. The kind that settles into the corners of your life when you realize you've finally taken something back that was yours all along, yet somehow, in doing so, you feel no joy, no victory, no real satisfaction, only space. That's what it felt like the morning after the car was taken and the phone line went dead. It wasn't triumphant, it wasn't sweet, and it certainly wasn't some cathartic release from years of family trauma. It was still. It was exact. It was mine. And it was overdue. The fallout began faster than I expected, not in grand explosions, but in precise, targeted strikes, like she had her own internal emergency response team fueled entirely by panic and pride. By noon that day, I had received 6 more voicemails, none of which I listened to in full, and 2 text messages from mutual friends, people who, until very recently, had been conspicuously silent during the unraveling of my reputation, who now suddenly found themselves invested in understanding both sides, as if my quiet endurance had made them uncomfortable, but my retaliation somehow made me dangerous. I didn't reply. I didn't justify. I didn't explain. I was done trading clarity for comfort, done twisting myself into palatable shapes just so others wouldn't choke on the truth of who I was when I stopped shrinking. But Lindsay wasn't done, not by a long shot. That night, around 9:30, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and, because curiosity still gets the better of me more often than it should, I answered. It was her boss, or at least the man she referred to as her boss, a mild, exhausted-sounding man named Kurt who spoke to me as if I were some loose wire sparking near a puddle. He said Lindsay had come into work, distraught, that she mentioned some difficult family dynamics, and that he just wanted to understand what had happened with the car and the phone, because it was affecting her ability to perform her job. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to ask him if she'd told him about the months she spent slowly poisoning people against me with her sweet concern and carefully chosen words, if she'd told him about the way she'd weaponized my mental health history, not as fact, but as narrative, turning every anxious moment into evidence, every boundary I set into instability. But instead, I stayed calm, measured, and professional. Everything that was taken away, I said, was mine to begin with. And frankly, if it's affecting her work, then perhaps she should look into resources for managing that. It's no longer my responsibility. He stammered something about hoping things could be resolved privately, but I'd already tuned him out. The moment she had dragged me through the court of public opinion, the word private had stopped applying. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew that retaliation, no matter how justified, carries weight, and in a world where image is everything, I couldn't afford to look petty or emotional or vindictive, especially not in my position. So, I called a friend of mine, a lawyer named Erica who had once handled a messy business dissolution for me with such grace and ferocity that I swore I'd never make a major move without her eyes on it. She listened to everything calmly, without judgment, and when I finished, she said, "You're not wrong. But just because it's clean doesn't mean it's harmless. She's going to spin this, and you know it." "I know," I said. "She already is." We spent the next 2 hours going over emails, documents, screenshots, anything that could be used to demonstrate a pattern of defamation, financial irresponsibility, and misuse of company property. Not because I was going to sue her, although the temptation lingered, but because I needed to be prepared for what came next. Because there's one thing people like Lindsay do when they realize you've slipped out from under their thumb, they go nuclear. And she did. 3 days after the car was impounded and her phone line was cut, my company's human resources department received an anonymous email outlining severe emotional abuse, professional misconduct, and erratic behavior toward a family member who was financially dependent. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, vague enough to require investigation, but personal enough to do damage. The sender used a generic Gmail account, but the phrasing, the details, the cadence, it was her. I would have bet my mortgage on it. HR called me in for a meeting. They were polite, appropriately cautious, and to their credit, they gave me space to explain. But even as I sat there outlining the full timeline of events, I could feel the shift, the slight recalibration of how they saw me, not as someone in control, but as someone who might, under the right pressure, become a liability. That's the real cost of reputational damage. It lingers. It echoes. It leaves you cleaning up messes that you didn't create, with hands too clean to be believed. I gave them everything: documents, emails, screenshots, even the voicemail where Lindsay had called me a crazy bitch for reporting the car. I didn't ask for sympathy. I asked for fairness. And when the meeting ended, I didn't cry or shake or fall apart. I went back to my office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop like it was just another Wednesday. But that night, as I walked through my apartment in the quiet, turning off lights, brushing my teeth, going through the motions of a life that now felt slightly tilted on its axis, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Not because of paranoia, not because of fear, but because I knew Lindsay. I knew her pride, her desperation to win, her pathological need to never be the one left holding the blame. And I was right. Because the next morning, before the sun had even risen, I received one final voicemail. Her voice, low and tired, almost a whisper. You win. I lost everything. You happy now? There was no apology, no ownership. Just a weaponized admission of defeat, meant to make me feel like I'd gone too far, like I had crossed a line by simply drawing one. And for a second, just a flicker of a second, I felt it, that pang of guilt, that old, familiar impulse to fix it, to soften, to reach out. But it passed. Because I wasn't the villain in this story. I wasn't the one who lit the match. I just refused to keep handing her the gasoline. There's a peculiar stillness that settles over your life when the storm finally passes, not the dramatic end we're taught to expect, with rain giving way to light or conflict surrendering to clarity, but something far more unnerving, the quiet of aftermath. Of too many words spoken and none of them taken back, of lines drawn in stone rather than sand, of a silence so thick and absolute it doesn't just fill a room, it defines it. That was the silence that clung to my apartment in the weeks after Lindsay's final voicemail, that low and bitter whisper of surrender that wasn't really a surrender at all, just a last-ditch attempt to twist the knife one more time on her way out of the spotlight. Because people like her don't say, "I'm sorry," unless there's a crowd to hear it, and even then, the apology is wrapped in a bow of accusation, designed less for repair and more to reinforce the idea that you were always the one who took things too far. I didn't respond to her message. I didn't delete it, either. I let it sit in my voicemail inbox like a cracked trophy on a shelf, useless, ugly, and yet still proof of something, even if I wasn't entirely sure what. Part of me hoped that was the end of it, that maybe she had finally exhausted herself, finally run out of breath and bravado, finally realized that I was done playing the role she'd assigned me, that I wasn't going to clean up her messes just because we shared blood and childhood stories we both remember differently. But another part of me, the sharper, more skeptical part, knew better. Because people like Lindsay don't stop. They regroup. They retreat long enough to rewrite the story in their favor, long enough to find a new audience, and when that happens, they come back swinging, not with facts or honesty, but with performance, with just enough wounded charm to make people forget the damage they've done. It was 3 weeks later, just as the dust had begun to settle, when the envelope arrived. A plain, unmarked legal envelope tucked in with my mail, so innocuous in appearance that I almost missed it, almost tossed it aside with the catalogs and credit card offers. But something about the weight of it, the way my name was typed instead of handwritten, made me pause. I slid my finger under the flap, unfolded the papers, and felt that same icy detachment I'd felt the day I learned my sister had been whispering about my mental health behind my back. Inside was a legal notice, Lindsay's petition to file for full custody of her son, citing unfit extended family environment, listing incidents of erratic behavior and emotional volatility, referencing, of all things, the voicemail she'd left me, the one where she called me a bitch and accused me of destroying her life. She had twisted it, just as I'd known she would, framing the situation as a consequence of my instability, presenting herself not as the aggressor, but as the survivor of my supposed decline. There was even a section in the filing where she claimed she feared for her safety, citing the vehicle report as retaliatory and psychologically harmful. For a moment, I couldn't move. I stood in my kitchen, paper in hand, coffee growing cold behind me, and stared out the window as if the sky might have an answer, as if some external force could provide the validation I suddenly, desperately needed. Because even though I knew it was nonsense, even though I had documentation and evidence and witnesses, there's something about seeing your name attached to accusations like that, formal, official, black ink on white paper, that makes you question yourself. Even when you know the truth like your own skin. I called Erica again, emailed her the documents, and waited for her verdict. She called me back in less than an hour, her voice sharp and focused, the way it always is when she's preparing for battle. "She's bluffing," she said. "This won't hold." But it's not about winning custody. It's about smearing you on paper. She's setting the stage for something else. Possibly public. Possibly legal. But definitely calculated. So once again, I found myself at a crossroads, not the loud kind with sirens and spotlight decisions, but a quiet, internal place where you choose between feeding the fire or walking away from the smoke. I could have fought back publicly. I could have exposed every lie, every receipt, every moment she weaponized my kindness against me. I could have dragged her name through the same mud she tried to bury me in. But what would that accomplish? Who would it serve? So I did something she never expected. I declined to respond. I didn't issue a counter-petition. I didn't challenge the filing. I didn't call our mother to explain or send out an email clarifying my version of events. I simply had my lawyer issue a quiet statement withdrawing any role in the boy's life, legal, financial, or otherwise, and then I sat down and wrote one final message, not to Lindsay, but to her son. A letter, sealed and unmailed, kept in a drawer for a time he might want to know what really happened, should he ever come looking for it. In the letter, I told him the truth, not the court-approved version or the whispered gossip passed around family holidays, but the truth as I lived it. I told him I loved him, even if I couldn't be in his life. I told him that sometimes being a grown-up means walking away, not because you don't care, but because you finally learn the difference between helping and enabling. I told him that silence, though painful, is sometimes the only weapon you have when your voice has been turned against you. And then I locked the letter away and closed that chapter, not with rage or resentment, but with the kind of weariness that comes from fighting too long in a war you never declared. They say revenge is best served cold, but I don't agree. I think real revenge is served slowly, over time, not with fire and fury, but with absence, with the quiet, measured removal of your presence from someone's life, the kind of revenge that doesn't come with consequences, just vacancy. It doesn't demand a headline. It doesn't shout. It just leaves. And sometimes, leaving is the loudest thing you'll ever do. Let them tell their stories. Let them twist the facts. Let them believe the silence means they've won. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: when someone spends their whole life trying to control the narrative, the one thing they can never handle is when you stop showing up for the story at all.